We'll probably have more people come in a little bit later, but in the meantime, thanks for coming back. Hopefully you don't fall asleep post-lunch. I'm Dr. Quinton. I'm from the Medical Examiner's Office in Dallas County, and boy, this thing kind of goes in and out. And I'm going to be covering a lot of different topics, and I'll try to do it in some way that makes sense to you, but we'll see. And there will be some overlap with what's already been talked about, but what you'll get to see is the perspective from the medical examiner versus the pediatrician, sort of how we attack the same types of injuries and interpretations. So first of all, to give you an idea of where I'm coming from, how many people in here are in fact police? I'd like to get an idea of law enforcement, a couple of hands. CPS? Couple. All right. I know I've got at least one lawyer in here. Okay. Mental health providers. Okay, so a little smattering of everybody. Okay. Well, originally, the little dude with the attitude right there is me. That's my dad. My dad was a New Orleans police officer for 35 years, retired just a couple years ago. So if anybody asks how in the world did I end up doing this, that's why. But as those of you who are cops will attest to, I'm one of those products of, son, do anything you want, just don't be a cop. Here I am. So this is where I work right now, which is in Dallas. Our new building, which has been around for about 2 years now. And encompassed within this facility, we have the medical examiner's office and also trace evidence, toxicology, DNA, let's see what else, firearms. All of those different labs are in the same facility. So we stay pretty busy out there. And we actually serve not only Dallas County, but about 70 surrounding counties. So a giant chunk of North Texas falls under my jurisdiction. So the kind of bridging the gap between what was spoken about the last 3 hours and what's going to happen this 3 hours, first thing I was going to do is touch briefly on milestones. And basically, why is it important to me as a medical examiner? Because you may be asking, what in the world does the medical examiner care about pediatric milestones? But they're very important because, as we've already focused on, in a lot of the things we do, it's not the injury that we see that is going to tell us the actual story or answer the question, but it's the interpretation of the history, the clinical scenario, and the autopsy, and the pediatric assessment in the hospital, all these things together. So one thing we always ask about is the scene investigation, and within that is just what can this child do? What is the child expected to be able to do at this particular age? Given that, knowing that, we can go into a scene and ask very important questions about basically feasibility of witness accounts, assess things in the home which may be a potential danger to that child. So for instance, if a child can actually make their way over to a plug and stick their finger in it, it's very different from a 2-month-old who can't do that. So the idea is to be able to ask informed questions about this child's ability and sort of determine the believability of a witness account. Basic concepts or definitions that we use. A neonate is basically within the first, say, 4 weeks of life. So newborn, neonate, less than 28 days. Typically, the kiddos we're talking about in these types of conferences are infants between 1 month and 12 months. And then after that, toddlers the next 2 years, basically. Kids all develop in the same sort of structured way, but they do it at different speeds. So you have to be really careful when you go in and you assess a child to determine, well, is this an appropriate fit for their age? Well, some kids obviously are going to develop faster than others, but they all do it sort of in the same step-by-step progression. So when we look at normal development, kids generally develop from head to foot, cephalocaudal, meaning that they're going to control things up here before they control things down here. They're going to think before they act. They're going to control their hands before they can really get around and control their feet. They're going to get teeth and eat, be focused on that long before they're going to actually start walking or running around. They also basically develop from proximal to distal, meaning from inner outward. So if you think about a newborn, they're really kind of floppy, and they hardly have any kind of trunk or any kind of control other than sort of some general trunk control. And then over time, they get some neck control, which will become important later when we talk about some types of injuries. And then they kind of move their way outward when we start talking about moving the arms, the legs, the hands, the fingers, things like that. And obviously, I think that is simple to complex. So, importantly here, you're not going to have a kid who's up and running around and and yet you can't sit up straight, right? So there's always a progression. Now, there's a wide range of weights and lengths to start out with, and in a lot of the scenes you go to, one of the questions you're going to ask is this child normal? Are they developing normally, or are they having some sort of failure to thrive? So you have to know sort of how this person started out. You can have a baby born at 5.5 pounds, you can have a baby born at 12 pounds. So seeing this baby now at, say, 9 months old, if you don't know what their baseline was at birth, you can't really assess how much they've thrived, right? Because if they're 12 pounds now, but they were 10 pounds at birth, and it's been 6 months, that's not normal. However, if they're 12 pounds now and they were only 5 pounds at birth, and it's 6 months later, then they're doing a pretty good job. So you have to know your baseline. In general, a rule is, this is just if you're doing a rough calculation in the field, but I found that in my office it tends to work pretty well. Babies weigh about twice their birth weight at around 4 months of age, and then triple that by about 12 months of age. So if you're just doing a super rough estimate out in the field, you can use that. Length often increases by about 50% by the time you're a year old. Now, we'll talk about in a minute growth charts, but growth charts are extremely valuable when you're talking about the potential argument of failure to thrive or neglect or anything like that, but I'll show you that in a minute. Again, there's a wide variability of milestones, and you have to take into account whether or not the child was a preemie. This doesn't really apply after the first year or so. So like if mom's telling you, yeah, he's a slow kid, he was a preemie, and now he's 3 years old, you can blow that off. But if they're 6 months old and they were a preemie, that might have substantial effect on what you're looking at. So just as an example, an infant born preterm, let's just say 37 weeks or less than 37 weeks, they will reach their milestones based on their due date, not when they were born. So if they weren't due to be born for another month, you have to sort of back everything up to account for that. But again, by about a year old, they pretty much equilibrate. Here's a newborn. That's what newborns do, pretty much nothing else. They cry, they eat, they poop, that's it. But this picture kind of shows us the general positions and sort of things that they do. They always have the kind of little quick jerky movements that don't have any intention behind them. They bring their hands near their face, but it's not intentional. Again, somehow the hand will get there and every once in a while they'll stick it in their mouth, but they're not intentionally doing that at this point. They keep their hands in fists. I love this part because grandma will, at 2 days old, will be all enamored by the fact that the child's holding her finger, and it's like, grandma, you just stick a pencil there, it doesn't matter. It's not, it's just what they do. But you don't tell grandma that, right? They move from side to side, they move their head from side to side while lying on their stomach, but after a couple of seconds of this, they usually get mad, pooped out, and they've just got their face, right down on the mattress, kind of screaming and crying, and then to move them. And that comes into play a lot when we're talking about the susceptibility of children to certain sleep positions, which I won't get into much in this lecture because we don't have a lot of time, but the sleep positions in our investigation is a crucial part of the investigation when we're talking about the possibility of asphyxial type death. They can only focus on objects about 10 to 12 inches away, so beyond that they can focus on sounds, but not really focus on something in their field of view. They do prefer human faces over other shapes, and they prefer very stark, general primary colors, black and white things. So if you think about going through, the Walmart toy section, the newborn toys have, bright, simple colors. You just have like a red block and blue block, and it's not complex patterns. They can hear very well, and they can track sounds and actually recognize some, and they will respond or track to parents' voices long before they do their actual faces. Second and third month, this is where we're starting to get some neck control. So we start out with a little bit of trunk control, now we're moving up to neck, but still in a pretty floppy stage. They can hold up their head while laying on their stomach for a little while, and then they usually get pooped and flop back down. They hold objects in their hand with a little bit more intent now, but still sort of just gripping it and then maybe rattling it around. They start to interact, smiling and cooing somewhere around this stage. My brother just had his first child, who was exactly 2 months old as of yesterday, and he and his wife are freaking out because it hasn't smiled yet. I'm like, it's okay, it'll happen. But it's usually right around the second, third month they start to get that interaction. By the third month, they can, oftentimes you'll see kiddos that can kind to sort of sit up as long as you're supporting them, but then, they flop around a lot too. They turn head towards sounds, track sounds better, and at this point is where they're reaching for objects with both hands. So, this important step of I see something, I'm interested in it, and now I know I can reach out and sort of grab for it, and then of course whatever the grab ends up in the mouth. So by the end of that point, we're raising head and sometimes chest when lying on their stomach, so they might be able to push up a little on their hands and lift their chest up. But note, and we've already talked about this in the last part of the lecture, that at this point they're not rolling yet. So a kiddo who's 2 months old, 2.5 months old, is, if you put them in the middle of a big queen bed, they're not going to roll off the bed. They can stretch out their legs and kick while lying on their stomach or their back, bring their hands to the mouth, grab and shake toys, things like that. And that's just more stuff tracking things, but now tracking it with your eyes and starting to use hand-eye coordination. So again, I see something, I'm reaching out, I'm grabbing it. And then obviously they enjoy playing with other people. I love, May cry when playing stops. They pretty much cry all the time. 4th and 5th months. Now we're starting to get the rolling action. So you have to take that into account in your investigation. Although really, it's really 5th and 6th months that you get the good rolling from front to back and stuff like that. But at this point, roll from side to side or on the back, clasp fingers, may sit up supported with little support at this point, and they start to recognize self, their own name. That's one of my poor children who will be featured multiple times during this. I apologize for that. At 6 months, this is important, transferring toys from one hand to the other. So the act of, I see it, I can touch it, I can grab it, pick it up, and then move it from one hand to the other. That's a lot more fine motor control, and it's a big step. It also, again, is where we're getting into this murky realm of they're just starting to be able to creep around. Maybe by the 6th, 7th month, they're crawling somewhat. If they can move, and they can see, and they can grab, you're in a whole new realm of your investigation when you go out to a scene and you're looking at the floor and you say, oh, look, there's coins on the floor, there's beads, there's this, there's that, things that potentially could end up in that child's airway, mouth, whatever, that at age 2 months old, you're really not going to be worried about. By 7th month is when they usually have the full-blown push-up on hands and knees and crawl. They're usually sitting up on their own by around this time. And again, this is the first phase where you get into that whole exploring phase, and where they can really get themselves into a lot of trouble if you're not watching. So by the end of the 7th month, typically rolling over both ways, stomach to back to stomach, sitting up, reaching for objects with their hands, supporting their weight while held upright. So basically, if you're holding them and giving them some support, they can kind of stand up on their legs. Using voice to express joy and displeasure. All kinds of things here. So, and again, exploring objects with hands and mouth. By the 8th and 9th months, we get more of a developmental, full-purpose crawl, and usually around this time is when they're starting to crawl up and down things as well. So you've got a whole new realm of possibilities when you're at the scene. Do you have gated stairs, things like that. This is the cruising stage, so he's standing up on his own, leaning against an object. You can kind of sort of toddle around or cruise around while they're holding something. Feeding self, so again, fine motor control. I can pick up a Cheerio in 2 fingers and eat it. And then 10th, 11th, and 12th months, basically right around this time, 10 months, you'll have a couple of kids that can actually walk on their own. You're going to have other kids that don't walk till they're like 14 months old, so there's a big variability there. 11th month, typically standing up by themselves and can sort of squat and stoop and pick up things and then get back up. 12th months, they're walking, typically pointing with fingers, very intentional, sort of direct movements. So by the end of year 1, they typically are sitting up without any assistance at all. If they're not at this point, you should be kind of concerned. So, obviously, if they can't do that, they can't do a lot of other things. Getting into the hands and knees position on their own, crawling, pulling themselves up to stand, using the pincer grasp, all important things. And then lots of sort of social things, imitating words, gesturing, saying no, or shaking their head, exploring. And an interesting one, I think, is finding hidden objects, because there's, at a certain point, the child realizes that when you hide something, it's still there. But before that, it's really kind of cool, because you can have something in front of them, cover it, and they're like, oh, it's gone, and they just go away. And then you uncover it, and it's like magic, but you don't have to be a good magician. But after this, they realize, like, no, I know it's under there, and they go under after that object. So, so that's it for just general milestones. Again, I think, and I don't have a lot of time to get into a lot of scene investigation details during this lecture, but I think it's something really important to be aware of, because you've got to be able to assess, what mom and dad are telling you, and if there's believability or credibility in their statements. And knowing what the baby should be able to do is important. And again, you're going to have some kids that go faster than others. You're going to have some that skip some steps, but not major ones. But for instance, like I've seen kids who never really crawl. They just sort of roll around the house and then eventually get dizzy and stand up and start walking. But they might not do the full-blown crawl. Now, failure to thrive, I'm not going to get into too much here, but just to say, this is where we're assessing a baby who looks like he possibly may be neglected, but you can have organic reasons where they may not be thriving. So they may have some sort of disease or